It's been a decade since I first stepped foot in Greenleaf National Park as its head ranger. The lush foliage, the centuries-old trees, the bubbling brooks, and thriving wildlife. I love it all. I've devoted every single day of these past 10 years to protect this magnificent patch of earth that, over time, has felt more like home than any house I've lived in. But now, things have begun to change, and not in a way I can explain. I remember vividly the day when my assistant of many years, Jerry, left his post due to a heart condition. His grizzled face softened by sorrow, his eyes moist. This park was as much a part of him as it was of me. His departure meant a new assistant was due, a man named Tom. I didn't know anything about Tom, but anyone willing to work in the wilderness was okay in my books, or so I thought. When Tom arrived, the park was in the thick of summer. Families were swarming the campsites, children laughing and scampering around like woodland creatures. Tom was quiet, but efficient. He took to his duties with a sober dedication that I admired. The first few weeks passed smoothly. The park thrived in its sunlit glory, and Tom fell into the rhythm of the place. However, the calm didn't last. The first incident was a couple of dead squirrels near the eastern trail. I thought nothing of it initially. Nature is, after all, a brutal cycle of life and death. Then, one early morning, I discovered a mutilated raccoon. I've never seen an animal attack like this, I confessed to Tom, who merely shrugged in response, his eyes averted from the grisly sight. With the passing days, the corpses of animals began to multiply, growing more grotesque and larger. A torn-apart deer, a bear cub cut into pieces. Each discovery twisted my stomach into a knot, causing me to worry about my park. "We have to do something, Tom," I insisted. "We can't just ignore this." He agreed, and we began to set traps, monitor the trails more intensively, alert the visitors to be cautious. I contacted the authorities, but their disinterest was palpable. "It's probably just a rogue bear, Michael. These things happen," they said. I wish it were that simple. Then, the disappearances started. The first were a group of college students who ventured into the deeper trails for a camping trip. They never returned. The search parties yielded nothing. The eeriness started settling deeper into my bones when a young married couple vanished without a trace, leaving behind a half-eaten meal at their campsite. The park was no longer a place of peace. It was a breeding ground for fear. I tried to unravel the mystery, plunging deeper into the park than I'd ever been before. The whispers among the park staff grew louder, and so did the nightmares. Shadowy figures lurking behind trees, eerie howls that weren't from any known animal. The feeling of being watched, my once serene haven, was now filled with unnamed horrors. "Something is wrong here, Tom," I told him one evening as we sat by the ranger station, the forest a dark silhouette against the night sky. "It's not just some rogue animal. We're dealing with something different." "Different how?" Tom asked, his gaze finally meeting mine. "I don't know. Yet," I confessed, a chill running down my spine as the wind howled through the desolate park. I could only hope we'd find out before it was too late. I found the place by accident. It was tucked away in a remote corner of the park, where few ever ventured. The clearing was lined with a crude stone circle, symbols etched onto the stones, covered in a dry, flaky substance that looked a lot like blood. My heart pounded in my chest as I traced the symbols with my fingers, the eerie familiarity of them sending a shiver down my spine. Strewn about the clearing were items, personal belongings, clothing, and body parts. An arm here, a leg there, and in the center, a skull. Eyes still intact, staring up at the sky in silent horror. My mind raced back to the missing campers, the young couple. Were these theirs? Were they victims of some horrific, twisted ritual? Was this the work of cultists? A maniac? The thought filled me with dread. I reported my findings to the police, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. The park had been turned into a hunting ground by some madman. Detective Brad, the head of the case, listened in silence, his tone grave. "Michael, first of all, I'm sorry I didn't listen to you right away when you asked for help. I know I got involved after the hikers disappeared, but what I found out makes me worried. I haven't figured it all out yet, and I have questions, a lot of weird questions, but..." He finally spoke, his voice heavy. "Michael, for now, keep an eye on your assistant, Tom." I felt my blood run cold. "Tom? Why?" "I don't have concrete proof yet," Brad admitted, but some things aren't adding up about him. Just watch him. Be careful." The line went dead, leaving me with my thoughts. Tom. Could he really be involved in all this? In the days that followed, I observed Tom more closely. His mannerisms, his routines. I found myself watching him for any signs of deceit. He seemed the same, dedicated and quiet, yet doubt gnawed at me. One evening, as Tom ventured deeper into the woods, I made my move. Using my spare key, I entered his cabin. I told myself it was necessary, that it was to find the truth. His belongings were ordinary: clothes, books, a toothbrush. Then I stumbled upon a worn, leather-bound book tucked away in his drawer. The symbols on the cover matched those I had found in the clearing. A cold realization swept over me as I flipped through its pages. Diagrams of rituals, detailed notes, cryptic messages. It was all there. Underneath the book, I found an ID. The face on the card was not the Tom I knew. The name read Tom Bennett, but the face was that of a stranger. A pang of betrayal washed over me. This man was not Tom. He was an imposter, a murderer masquerading in a stolen identity. I ran back to my cabin, my mind a whirl of thoughts and fears. I picked up the phone and dialed Brad's number. I spilled everything in hurried, anxious sentences. There was silence at the other end, then a deep sigh. "Michael, lock your doors and stay put. We're coming." When the cops arrived, their presence brought a momentary relief. Their stern faces and loaded weapons filled me with a sense of hope. Perhaps we could end this nightmare. Brad, a few cops, and I prepared to venture into the heart of the park. As we headed deeper into the forest, I felt an unsettling change. The air was colder, heavier, as if carrying the weight of a hidden terror. Even the trees seemed darker, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Brad and I took the lead, our footsteps muffled by the underbrush. The rest of the police force scattered throughout the rest of the park. Then came the gunshots, shattering the eerie silence. I jerked around, my heart pounding in my chest. Screams followed, a symphony of terror resonating through the woods. "West, west, something big, shadow, I can't..." The radio hissed with static, the words of the officer from the west barely discernible. His sentence was cut short by a scream and a growl that curdled my blood. Without a word, Brad and I moved towards the west, the chilling echoes of the screams guiding our path. The forest, once a safe haven, now loomed ominously, the shadows seeming to grow and twist with each passing second. The scene we stumbled upon was grotesque. Pieces of human bodies littered the ground and hung from the trees, torn apart by something ferocious. The sight threatened to bring my dinner back up, the metallic scent of blood overwhelming. "Brad, we need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. He nodded, his face pale as he reached for his radio. "All officers, retreat. I repeat, retreat now." No response came. The radio crackled ominously in the deafening silence. He tried again and again, but it was as if we were the last people left in the world. Realization struck me like a sledgehammer, my heart pounding in sync with the terror coursing through my veins. The officers, my friends, were dead. It was only Brad and me. And somewhere out there was the false Tom, the man behind the ritualistic killings. But there was also something else. Something monstrous. Something I couldn't fathom. A terror that even the killer himself might fear. The rustling behind us snapped me out of my thoughts. Brad and I turned around in unison to find ourselves facing a grotesque sight. It was massive, covered in shaggy fur, its long arms ending in razor-sharp claws. The creature's face was obscured by hair, but there was no missing the oversized jaws filled with teeth that looked like they could chew through metal. The horrifying sight of the creature was made all the more abhorrent by the figure protruding from its back. The false Tom, twisted and deformed, was growing out of the beast, his face twisted into a malevolent grin. I was rooted to the spot, my body refusing to obey my commands. Brad, to his credit, immediately pulled out his weapon and began firing. The creature dodged with ease, charging towards us with a bone-chilling roar. "Run, Michael!" Brad ordered, stepping in between me and the monster. It was his command that finally unfroze me. I turned and ran, the deafening sound of gunshots and the monster's roar echoing in my ears. I'm no hero. Fear drove me, pumping adrenaline through my veins as I sprinted towards my cabin. Fumbling with my keys, I managed to get inside my pickup and ignite the engine. As I drove towards town, I dared a glance at my rearview mirror. There he was, the false Tom. He was back in his human form, grinning madly, waving as if saying goodbye. The night was a blur of panic and phone calls, of reinforcements and a sense of impending doom. Local hunters, volunteers, and additional cops flooded Greenleaf Park, their torches flickering like stars against the enveloping darkness. We found remnants of the carnage, the detective's badge, pieces of what used to be my friends. But of the monster and the false Tom, there was no trace. The woods felt different, lighter perhaps, but not devoid of that feeling of being watched. The story spread quickly, turning into legend. They say that the shaggy monster with a man growing from its back still roams the woods. Some claim to have seen it lurking among the trees. As for me, I can't shake off the feeling that the creature is still there. I was just another eager-faced recruit fresh out of the academy when I first set foot in Silent Pines National Park. My name's Mark, by the way. I felt an instant bond, a visceral connection with the place. It wasn't just the wildlife or the majesty of the towering pines. It was the solitude, the promise of untamed adventure. I thought I was ready for anything, but the wilderness quickly proved me wrong. The first few weeks were filled with routine duties, ensuring campers abided by the rules, dealing with minor wildlife encounters, issuing warnings for illegal bonfires. It was mundane, but I savored every moment. It was my dream, after all, to be a ranger. Then the strangeness began. I remember the first time vividly. I'd been doing the dawn patrol when I came across a sight that made my stomach turn. A roe deer, lifeless. Its body was not just killed, it was savaged, ripped apart in a manner that was almost personal. Unsettling, yes, but it was the wilderness. Predator and prey, it's the law of the land. Yet it was the brutality of the attack that had me unnerved. I've seen the results of bear attacks before. This was different, more vicious. That evening, I shared my concerns with my fellow rangers, but they shrugged it off, attributing the attack to some large, displaced predator. It's the circle of life, they'd said. More incidents followed. A bear, an elk, a raccoon, each more vicious than the last. This was no ordinary predator. I felt it in my bones. There was something out there, something stronger, more ferocious than a bear. Maybe it's a grizzly. They can do a lot of damage, Bill, a veteran ranger, suggested one day as we surveyed another mutilated carcass. No, this isn't the work of a grizzly. It's something else, I argued. I wasn't a seasoned expert like Bill, but even I knew grizzlies didn't kill like this. Bill just chuckled and patted me on the shoulder. You're letting your imagination run wild, kid. It's just nature doing its thing. But his eyes were tight, his smile forced. Despite their dismissal, the incidents were taking a toll on everyone. There was an undercurrent of anxiety among the rangers, a ripple of fear among the campers. The once comforting solitude of the park felt oppressive, hostile even. I found myself spending my nights poring over books and animal attack reports, searching for something, anything, that could explain the escalating violence. Yet, each search left me feeling more helpless, more alone in my quest for answers. One evening, as I sat huddled over my makeshift research station, Sarah, a fellow ranger, joined me. Sarah was a botanist by training, her affinity for plants and fungi rivaling my own for the animal kingdom. We had built a comfortable camaraderie over shared hikes and campfire stories. Her presence was a balm to the growing unease. Still playing detective, Mark? She teased, looking at the scattered documents on the table. Someone has to, I retorted, managing a weary smile. She glanced at a particularly gruesome photo, her joviality fading. I wish I could say you're wrong, that it's just the way of the wild, but this ... it quote s unsettling. Her admission that I wasn't alone in my fear was oddly comforting. We spent the rest of the night sharing our theories, delving into the folklore of predatory beasts that stalk the wild, fueling our speculations. It was a morbid topic, yet it felt good to be able to discuss it without dismissal. As weeks turned into months, I felt the park changing around me. It was as if a dark shadow had settled over the verdant woods. The once lively chatter of the forest now hushed, the animals unusually scarce. The continuing attacks had put everyone on edge, the air heavy with a tension that felt almost palpable. Despite the fear, I refused to let the unknown deter me from my duties. I found solace in the routine patrols, the rhythmic crunch of my boots against the forest floor serving as a grounding mantra against the building dread. I used these moments of solitude to train myself, pushing my senses to their limits, trying to tune in to the subtlest whispers of the forest. The park was my canvas, a vast expanse of uncharted wilderness. I began by mapping out the locations of the killings, marking each incident with a red dot. A pattern soon emerged. The attacks were concentrated in the remote northern sector, an area of the park rarely frequented by visitors, dense with foliage and riddled with hidden caves and clefts. It was as if the beast had a territory, a hunting ground. Day in and day out, I ventured into the northern woods, the heart of the beast's domain. I was a stranger in this part of the park, the thick undergrowth unfamiliar, the silence eerie. Yet the solitude and danger of the wilderness were a small price to pay for the answers that lay hidden within its depths. Every morning, armed with my camera, my notebook, and my unyielding resolve, I would venture deeper into the forest. The rich scent of pine, the soft chatter of the forest creatures, the ancient hush that seemed to echo in the wind. Everything was a potential clue. One late afternoon, after hours of trudging through the dense undergrowth, I stumbled upon something strange. My eyes, now accustomed to searching for anomalies in the forest, spotted an unusual indentation in the soft earth. A footprint. It was larger than any I had seen before, its outline harsh against the forest floor. The print was strange, a bizarre amalgamation of several species yet belonging to none. It had the size of a bear's, the claw marks of a big cat, but the overall shape was wrong. It didn't fit into any category of wildlife I knew of. I felt a chill run down my spine as I traced the edges of the print with my fingers. This was a tangible proof of the unknown terror, a silent proclamation of its existence. Intrigued and more than a little scared, I took several photographs, sketched the footprint in my notebook, and even made a plaster cast to examine later. I planned to reach out to experts. Maybe someone in the vast world outside Silent Pines could provide me with answers. One morning, after yet another sleepless night filled with monstrous dreams and haunting silences, I ventured further north than I ever had. My senses were on high alert, my every instinct screaming at me that I was venturing into forbidden territory, the den of the beast. With each passing minute, the feeling of being watched intensified, a prickle at the back of my neck, an icy sensation creeping down my spine. The gaze was almost tangible, like the cold touch of winter or the searing heat of a midday sun. Yet each time I turned around, there was nothing but the silent forest staring back at me. Ignoring the chill of fear that clung to me, I pushed forward. For hours I trudged on, my steps silent in the thick carpet of pine needles, my heartbeat thunderous in my ears. All the while the unseen eyes never wavered, tracking my every move, sizing me up. I was the intruder here, the unwanted guest. The feeling of being watched was unrelenting, my own shadow an unreliable companion. It wasn't until I reached a small clearing that the sensation reached its crescendo. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, the hairs on my arms standing on end. And then, as if materializing out of the encroaching twilight, there it was, a shadow, a silhouette far larger than any creature in these woods should cast. My breath hitched as I took in its size. This was no figment of my imagination, no trick of the fading light. There was something out there, something monstrous, something unnatural. The shadow shifted, a faint rustle of leaves its only announcement. And then, as swiftly as it had appeared, it was gone. There was no trace of the entity that had held me captive with its gaze. There was only the silent wilderness, a darkened maze, hiding its secrets behind veils of shadow and fear. I stood there, in that cold, quiet clearing, my heart pounding, my breath shallow. The day after my encounter with the shadow, I spent the better part of the morning setting up traps in the northern sector. My objective was not to harm, but to capture, to finally come face to face with the entity that had become my constant nightmare. I knew it was a risky plan. Trapping a predatory beast in its own territory was a dangerous gamble. But the answers I sought were within reach, hidden in the shadows of the wilderness, lurking in the depths of my fear. The traps I set were humane, designed to restrain rather than harm. I used my knowledge of the park and the patterns I had observed to select the locations, hoping to lure the creature into my carefully laid plan. 24 hours later, armed with binoculars and a healthy dose of courage, I positioned myself on a ridge overlooking the area where I had set the traps. The early morning light painted the forest in a wash of golden hues, the serenity a stark contrast to the tension that thrummed through my veins. After hours of patient observation, there was a sudden flurry of movement near one of the traps. A figure emerged from the dense undergrowth, its size and form leaving no room for doubt. It was the creature, the beast of silent pines, and it was caught in my trap. Through the lenses of my binoculars, I could see it clearer than ever. Towering with a broad-shouldered frame covered in thick matted fur, it was a monstrous silhouette brought to life. But it wasn't a silhouette of a predator known to these parts. No, it was something straight out of folklore, a creature of myth and legend. It was Bigfoot. The sight of the creature left me frozen. I had heard the tales, of course, the stories shared around the campfire, whispers of the elusive giant of the woods. Yet, seeing it in person was a different story. The sheer size of it, the raw power evident in its muscular frame, it was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The Bigfoot thrashed and growled, testing the strength of the trap. Each flex of its muscles, each snarl of frustration was a harsh reminder of the creature's power. I knew I was no match for it, not physically. A part of me yearned to approach, to get a closer look at the legendary creature. But the ranger in me, the protector of both the park and myself, held me back. I continued to watch from my safe distance, the creature in the trap, and I locked in a tense stalemate. As the hours passed, however, a sense of unease began to creep in, a growing suspicion that I was not alone. The familiar feeling of being watched came back, and after a while I noticed movement in the surrounding undergrowth. Holding my breath, I adjusted the focus, trying to discern what was hidden in the shadows. And then, as if a veil had been lifted, I saw them. More creatures. More Bigfoots. It was a small group, their towering silhouettes almost blending into the thick foliage. They moved with caution, their eyes never leaving the trapped creature. It was then I realized the truth, a truth that both amazed and terrified me. I was not just dealing with a lone Bigfoot, but a family that had come to rescue one of their own. The rescue operation was swift and precise. They worked together, their size and strength making quick work of the trap. I could only watch in disbelief as the captive Bigfoot was freed, a cheer of triumph echoing through the forest. The family regrouped, their hulking forms disappearing into the dense undergrowth, leaving behind a broken trap and a stunned ranger. In the quiet aftermath of the rescue, as I tried to process the enormity of what I had just witnessed, a noise startled me from my thoughts. It was a low growl, a warning, coming from behind me. My blood ran cold, my mind screaming at me to run. Slowly I turned around, coming face to face with the beastly eyes of another Bigfoot. The Bigfoot watched me, its gaze holding a mixture of anger and warning. It towered over me, a living embodiment of the wild, a creature straight out of myths and legends. It growled once more, a final warning, before turning and disappearing into the thicket of the forest. In the days that followed, an uneasy peace fell over Silent Pines. The killing of animals in the park stopped. The Bigfoots, it seemed, had left, their presence now just a memory, a shadow that had lifted. I was left with a tale that was too fantastical, too surreal to be believed. Who would believe that the Silent Pines had been the home of a family of Bigfoots? Who would believe that a young ranger had witnessed a creature of legends, had come face to face with a myth brought to life? The rational part of me hesitated, doubted if anyone would believe my story. Yet the experience had left an indelible mark on me. I would remember the encounter for the rest of my life, the memory of the Bigfoots forever etched in my mind. Silent Pines, my home, my sanctuary, was now a part of a larger world, a world where legends roamed, where the line between the ordinary and the extraordinary was blurred. The encounter with the Bigfoots changed me, made me see the world in a different light. I realized then that the wilderness was not just a place of tranquility, but also a realm of mystery, a land where myths came alive, where the known and the unknown coexisted. As the protector of silent pines, I knew I had a role to play in preserving this delicate balance, in ensuring that the legends remain undisturbed, hidden in the shadows of the wild.